Excellent. Okay, first we must start out by thanking our supporters, the people who underwrote this. This is the first of 4 board governance sessions. So the Dyson Foundation, the Community Foundations of the Hudson Valley, Community Foundation of Orange and Sullivan, and then we have a regional advisory council in the Hudson Valley. So we thank them as well. There's quite a bit of input into this. To let you know, Board Strong is an affiliate of the New York Council of Nonprofits, and we are the affiliate whose mission is to basically advance the nonprofit sector. We're your one-stop shop for everything having to do with boards. We do trainings like this, recruiting, placement, etc. And for those of you who are looking for new board members, we have a board matching platform, www.boardstrong.org. You can sign up and look for people who are candidates looking to join boards, and it's free for nonprofits in the Hudson Valley. So what are we going to be covering? We're going to be covering the various perspectives of the board chair and the CEO, understanding their different roles, setting shared expectations between the CEO and the board chair, building and supporting the partnership, a little bit about leading partners, just sort of level setting about what we're doing here. I'm going to be talking, assuming that the organization that you're with has at least one paid employee. So the paid employee is not the board chair or a voting board member. By CEO, we mean executive director, chief paid employee, etc. By chair, we mean the board chair or the board president, the person who's in charge of the board. So let's get started. And again, please do, if you see something that relates to your own personal circumstances, you have a comment or a question, just put it right in the chat or raise your hand. We put these things together based on what we think people will be interested in, but you never know until we start whether we're on the right track. So why are we doing this? Well, this is a slide from BoardSource, which every 2 years does a nationwide nonprofit survey of executive directors and board members called Leading with Intent. You can get it on their website. But what they found is that what matters most in the leadership of organization with boards is that they understand their roles and their responsibilities there, that people work collaboratively, as a team working towards shared values. And that's where boards report that they have the most positive impact on organizational performance. So it's worth really talking about being intentional about understanding the roles and responsibilities and also working towards building that collaboration so that you do have the most positive impact on your organization. We're going to start here with a poll. I'm interested in knowing who my audience is. So if you would just put in there whether you're the executive director, the chair. If you're an executive director and your chair is here, I'm interested in that too. And then everybody else. Out of 28, 26. All right. So it looks like we have a pretty good balance of the 27 of you. 37% are executive directors, 30 are board chairs. Nobody seems to be a board chair team. And then there's some other staff members and board members. So it looks like we'll be talking in the way things apply equally to your chair and to your executive director. So board chair is a very special role in an organization. It's the leader of the board, required to keep the board on track. We did a panel in January. We asked some board chairs, what keeps them up at night. That panel, by the way, is that was recorded. It's available on our website. But they said things like, imposter syndrome. I've never been a board chair before. I don't know what consistently fear of failure. And recognizing that the decisions that are made can have repercussions on the community they care for, right? Recognizing that the role is more challenging, more time, recognizing that it's part of the role to keep the organization focused on mission and really trying to figure out how they can support the leadership in navigating these challenging times without, micromanaging. So, in other words, board chairs are dedicated to the organization and the mission. They are sometimes very uncertain about their roles, overwhelmed by the responsibility. Of course, other times, board chairs have been on the board for years and may have set ideas about their role that aren't working for the organization. May be true of the executive director as well, but it sort of recognizes that it is quite frequent that your volunteer leadership is insecure about what they're doing, needs guidance, needs help, and needs the collaboration with the executive director to really move the organization forward. And why is that important? Well, the board chair's role is critical, right? This is, again, board source and leading with intent, right? If the board chair is able to establish clear expectations of the board and encourage them to frame and discuss strategic questions, then the board will understand their roles and responsibilities better. And if the board chair is able to resolve conflict, build consensus, reach compromise, and foster an environment that builds trust, then the board's ability to act as a collaborative team towards shared goals is enhanced. And of course, as we know, that makes the organization stronger. So we need to support the board chair in that endeavor in order to build our organization. So when we think about the role of the CEO and the board chair, I think we need to think about this as leader partners, right? Two people leading the organization in pursuit of its mission. While, on paper, in theory, the board is the boss of the executive director, that kind of attitude or that kind of, disposition is less, I think, useful than thinking of it as a partnership, right? You're not telling each other what to do. You're really supporting each other in the mission. So it's got to be intentional. You have to think about it, make an effort to make it work. You have shared responsibility. And why else is it critical to the success of the organization? Well, the relationship between the executive director and the CEO is critical to the job satisfaction of the CEO, right? And we want to keep our CEOs, our great CEOs, satisfied because they're not that easy to find and to lead our organizations. So let's sort of remind ourselves of the various roles of these two positions. So you have the board leadership. The board president is responsible for sort of shepherding and managing the board itself. There are hierarchies, there are relationships, and then the executive director, CEO, is responsible for managing and, again, shepherding the staff. So that relationship there is critical. While it can be important for other board members to build relationships with other staff members. For example, we have those lines there from the treasurer to the CFO. There's usually a relationship everybody has with the chief development officer. It's really that relationship that is what funnels the views and the needs of the board to the executive director and then back again. So we want to create an open environment where nobody assumes what the other wants or needs and where there's really good communication and trust and respect between those two people. Okay, but we want to remember that the board has different perspective and a different job than the staff. So, the board is thinking big picture. What are the goals for our organization? What should be our policies? What do we do to what extent does this align with our mission? What training do we need? How can we ensure that the organization is run well, right? These are all things that the board is worried about and should be concerned about. And so they need tools like a strategic plan or a policy manual. They need stakeholder input, and they need to be cognizant of the articles of incorporation and their bylaws. So very much, thinking about the big picture. And the CEO perspective is more, how will we as an organization accomplish our mission? When will we? How will we? Who? What are our action plans? What are our procedural guidelines and regulations? Organization design, staffing, reports. So the CEO is responsible for the day-to-day management of the organization. The board is responsible for the vision. And again, they're both responsible for shepherding the resources that you need to get there. So just a reminder, the executive director exercises authority and accomplishes expectations as designated and established by the board. So that's a position that is defined by its bylaws, job description, directives and policies, and practice or culture, right? Your board chair is your chief volunteer executive officer. So that person is responsible for identifying the jobs and roles needed to accomplish the board's work and break into reasonable and realistic assignments, right? He's or she is responsible for deploying the board team as needed to accomplish goals. This is important to remember because we want to remember that this is not the role of the staff or the executive director, that board leadership, board management, board relationship very much has to be a peer-to-peer relationship. And so the board chair is responsible for ensuring that that goes on. They're also responsible for monitoring and supervising the business and affairs of the corporation, right? They're on all calls and preside at meetings of the board of directors. Generally, the board chair serves as ex officio on committees, can be a signatory as authorized by the board, and is the official spokesperson along with the executive director. So again, defined roles for both of them, very big roles, but it's important, you know, as in everything, to really define the roles and the spheres where people operate and where they intersect. Okay, so we're going to go, let's go into actually a little bit of managing this relationship and ensuring that it's productive and important and good for your organization. So common concerns of the CEO: the board chair is disengaged, doesn't engage in leadership, doesn't seem to have a clue, right? Too much second guessing of management, doesn't hold their peers accountable, goes around the chain of command with staff. And so the CEO may think, you know, they're my boss, I'm not going to tell them what to do, it's their job, or do their job for them. And that's a common trap or theme that we want to make sure to avoid and think about how we get past that to a place where there's collaboration. I'm just going to ask you, if people, if you want to do it anonymously so that I can only see it, are there other concerns that people have that have brought them here today? And you can put that in the chat where only I and the other presenter sees it. So come on, is that everything, folks? All right, well, in that case, let's keep moving along. Okay. Thank you. Derek says the list looks good. I appreciate that. Oh, okay. Interesting. Here's one where the board chair is, well, is a concern that the board, that he doesn't want to engage with, sorry, the CEO of a subsidiary organization. That's interesting. Let's see if we can sort of address that as we go along. Who should set the board agenda? Should the full board be involved? Who has the final say? We're going to get to that in a minute. So I should answer that in a couple of slides. If I don't answer it to your satisfaction, then please come back to me. Okay, so what are the core elements of a positive CEO board relationship? So there's a list here. I'm going to go through them. And this is where we're talking about a framework of working together, right? That we wanted to have these elements. But I do want to say it's kind of a pervasive and deeply held belief that if we just clarify the roles and responsibilities between an organization's board chair and executive director, that's the primary means for building an effective partnership. And actually, they've done research and they found that one of the critical elements is the process of give and take, working it out together. So this first thing, developing mutual trust and confidence, is a process between two distinct individuals, right? And so in some ways you have to work it out for your own. You can go through the roles and responsibilities that I just showed you, the separate spheres, but it comes through working together and understanding what your partner's strengths and weaknesses are. I think that during COVID, particularly, if you look at like how trust was built, it was asking each other, what do you need? How do we get through this together? And not necessarily just a faithful adherence to the roles and responsibilities as they are on paper, as they are described. So that was, I think, useful to go through. But, and I'm going to send you these slides afterwards. So you want to really realize that this relationship has to be one that's open and honest, and that to build trust with each other, right? Openness, no surprises, of course. Regular communication, and someone just, let me get to that question in a moment about where the allegiance of the organization is. So regular communication, support and encouragement. Again, this is sort of like it's a leadership team. It is, we recognize, especially board chairs have limited time. They have day jobs, they're volunteers. CEOs have limited resources. Staff is thin. Our expectations are high. So you want it to be a supportive relationship. You do want to build in an accountability structure, thinking about, okay, what are the goals of each side of this equation? How do we set those goals and how do we measure those goals? I think too often we get sort of bogged down in the day-to-day and saying, well, we're doing a good job, and not necessarily step back and say, how are we assessing that good job? How are we supporting each other? How do we know we're doing a good job, right? Again, understanding respect for responsibilities, thinking about the style and the fit and acknowledging it. And sometimes maybe, thinking about how we make it work given our different styles, especially if the history of the organization. Sometimes, if you have a new CEO and a longtime board chair, for example, one of you may have different expectations about who's the leader in that relationship or who's the dominant person in that relationship. And you kind of need to bring that out, put it in the table and talk about it. And if you need me to, if you need to take these slides and put it in front of that person to talk this through, please feel free to do that. Because again, it's just the partnership is so important. And then obviously, as I mentioned, criteria for success. Competence is also important. When I put this together, I thought, should I put together a slide on the ideal characteristics of a board chair? But I think, first of all, that's pretty intuitive. And secondly, we're frequently not in the position where we're going to go out and identify all of the great, identify the board chair based on those criteria. Our board chairs frequently come to us through devotion to the organization, long-term service, willing to step up to the role. So we realize as we are board chairs or we are CEOs that there are places where we have insecurities or there are gaps, and there are places where we are very competent, and everybody in the world is a mixed bag, as we know. So I did want to, there's someone who put a question in the chat that says, if board members are elected by their communities, is their allegiance to the organization's mission or to the taxpayers they represent. The mission. So every nonprofit organization in the state of New York is chartered by the New York State Attorney General, by the Charities Bureau, and the goal, the law, is to be faithful to the mission of the organization, right? Duties of care, loyalties, and obedience. You must put the mission of the organization whose board you're on above all those things. So this person, if you want to send me, my email is on the front. If you want to send me an email and chat a little bit more about that specifically, I'm fine with that. I'm happy to discuss that further. Okay. So tips for building a strong partnership, right? Again, you want it to be intentional, and you also want to make sure that you're on the same page, right? That your board and your staff are marching towards the same strategic vision, moving the organization forward, right? It's important to understand if there's a disconnect there, if there's a separation in any way. There are, sometimes board members, chairs, et cetera, are wedded to the past. Or sometimes we don't, as staff members, communicate to them where we think the organization is going or should be going. So they need to be clued in on what the vision of the organization is, what the environment that we work in is, so that, back to the thing, they have a clue about what we're doing and how they can help. Again, building the working relationship, being intentional about it. I have some tips for that later on, but I think it's like everything else, we don't want to take these things for granted. We want to understand each other. Building a working relationship also means that, there could be conflict. You need to think about how you work through those conflicts, give each other a little grace every once in a while. Definitely creating the organizational structure and process that helps. And I think by this, what we mean too is for your board, your committee structure, your officers, ensuring that you have those people in place. Sue Hoger has just raised her hand. Uh-oh. Okay, hold on. Let me see if I can unmute you. Okay, Sue, I think I just unmuted you. You raised your hand, but you're on mute. Sue?
Yeah, you did actually answer my question in what you just said. Thank you.
Oh, okay, good. It's always nice when that happens. Oh. All right. I'm glad I did. We do other webinars about committee structure, et cetera. But that's an important way that the board chair can manage the board and can manage the work that they do. So again, defining roles and responsibilities. We talked a little bit about that, really ensuring that everybody knows like what their job is. And then, building a strong partnership also means that you work together to engage the full team and think about the leadership pipeline, both board and staff. So while the CEO and the board primarily interact with one another, you want to think about who's going to replace the board chair when their term is over or when they're ready to step down. How is the team, how are you together building, the succession plan so that board members have leadership opportunities so that they understand what the leadership opportunities are and what the job is. And I think for some organizations, the chair does so much that it looks like a really insurmountable job. And so we need to think together like how to make sure that if that is the way they operate, that it's not necessary that the next person operate that way. All right, So, what do strategic organizations have? Again, shared mission, values. Think about your communication systems, feedback loops, etc. Think about, being proactive about leadership for a commitment to learning, organizational and individual. So thinking together about how do we build the competencies of our board, of our organization, right? And then the ability to adapt and maneuver quickly. And I think we really saw that during COVID, which organizations can do that and which can't. And we learned a lot, I would say. It's very important. So here are some tips to building the relationship as we, first of all, back to that whole point about understanding that you are leader partners, right? Yes, the CEO in theory does report to the board. The board does evaluate the CEO and is responsible for that. But it's, it needs to be a mutual, a relationship of mutual respect and mutual strategy around how we move the organization forward. So you want to think about the history, who has the most experience with the organization, coaching. I think that if you have a new board or a new board chair, and you're an executive director, think about who's coaching whom. Think about coaching each other, or the board. If you're a CEO and you have more experience than your board, and your board is somewhat like not doing what they're supposed to, or not quite understanding their role, then think of yourself as a coach, and it's your job or your position to really help them step up and be who you want. Back to my earlier slide, sometimes you just get exasperated and you say, well, they don't know what they're doing. They're not doing what they're supposed to, but it's worthwhile strategizing with the board chair and saying, how do we get to them doing what they're supposed to? Similarly, if you're the board chair, sometimes the CEO isn't communicating with you or not giving you what you need or what you think you need to really understand where the organization is. It's tempting to sit back and say, well, I'm a volunteer. That person is a professional. I don't have to deal with this, and just step back as well. That is not good for the organization if you think about it. It really is working together to move the organization forward. So being intentional about that communication and really thinking about how do we strategically break those log jams, it will really improve just your organization's functioning generally, because as we know, boards that function at a higher level mean that our organizations succeed better. I think it's good to schedule, meet and check in often between the CEO and the board chair. Put on your calendar, maybe weekly, maybe every other week, maybe before the board meeting, just make sure that you talk and without, what's going on, how are you doing, how are you supporting each other, make yourselves available to each other, and then engage in meaningful dialogue. Why are we, not just little check-ins, but why are we here? Strategize. Why are we accomplishing big things? Occasionally just have a free-ranging conversation about how are we doing. Anything else? Has anybody else done things that you feel really builds your connection between your CEO and your board chair? All right, well, Sue has raised her hand again.
I'm sorry, I do have a question, and I have to say I'm neither a board chair or a CEO, but I've been both in the past. I'm currently on a new board, and I told them when I came on the board, my primary focus was to make them a better board, because they didn't even have things like a corporate compliance policy in place. And so I'm running into a lot of the things that you're talking about, and probably this is a conversation for afterwards, but where we have a very new kind of weak internal promotion. So he's never been experienced as a CEO, and a very experienced board director, but he's totally burned out. So they meet, they talk, the meetings turn out to be secretive. They don't tell the rest of the board what they're talking about. I think they're productive meetings as best as I can tell. And I don't think the secretness is on purpose, like towards any end. I think they're both just kind of like, we're comfortable with the two of us because that's as far as we've developed our relationship. And so I was just kind of wondering, for those of us who are like on the outside sort of watching this, if you have any suggestions.
So when you came in, you said, I'm here to make your board better. Did they say, good, we need that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, so call that out then, right? And use
Okay.
my slides. But I think, yeah, I mean, it's not always easy to say to someone, this is not working for us, or we're not doing this right. It has to be a positive, optimistic conversation. So, but if you don't talk about it, it's never going to change. So if you frame it, our board could be more effective if we knew more, we're working better as a team. And I think that you burnt out board chair. I've observed that maybe we could help you, right, by taking some of the work off your hands or something along those lines.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been doing that. Yeah. I need a second or third person to help me do that too. So that's good to know that direction. Thank you.
Yeah. I also think it never hurts to sign these people up for some of these webinars. There's a couple, there's plenty of.
I tried. I'll keep working on that.
I think it's, have a board retreat, you could go into executive session at your next board meeting and just spend, saying, I want to spend 10 minutes, 15 minutes talking about how the board is operating. I came here to make it better, or I observe things that I think could make us better, and just talk about those things. If you feel like your other board members would engage in that kind of conversation to create a safe space.
Yeah, you're really making me feel good about this, because I asked for half an hour at our annual meeting in June. So you're really kind of making me feel like I'm on the right path a little bit.
You didn't need me at all.
No. I don't know what I'm doing. I just kind of feeling my way along. Well, thank you.
That's funny. Yes. So here Vincent says, our board, our board requires the president and VP to meet together with the supervisor and the CEO, so no secrets. I think that they can, the relationship between the board chair and the CEO, if they do meet frequently, which we encourage them to, can lead them sometimes to maybe start acting without checking in with the board as they should. Not often, but that's why it's important to have regular board meetings and to talk about those things, to have board retreats, and again, webinars. And we here at Board Strong and NICON have tons of resources around that sort of thing. Okay, so we have someone who asked, any tips on how to help a founder and board transition from a time when there was no CEO and the founder did everything, how they wanted to anything they wanted to how they operate with a CEO in place, understanding what the board roles are and are not is a tough transition. So that is a topic all on its own. The role of the founder in stepping down and sustaining the organization. And I think that all of this that I've just mentioned pertains, particularly the board, the CEO, the new staff member, as coach and honest. But to a certain extent, you have to get the founder to upfront to acknowledge that they want to make this transition, that they want their organization to be sustained beyond them, or they don't have the, whatever reason that it's not working for the founder to be in charge of everything. It's not an easy thing. There's a reason why many, webinars, papers are devoted to this. Founders, it's very hard to let go. And frequently we join those boards because we're engaged with the vision of the founder, right? We want the, we love the choreography of that person. Think about Paul Taylor, Alvin Ailey, Merce Cunningham, right? These are people where they're very much identified with the organization. And even, it doesn't need to be an arts organization, even some founder organization, human resources, et cetera, they've done things the way they've always done them. So it's a challenge, and it requires dialogue, and it doesn't always work, I have to say. But it does it really does, if you engage in it and make your best effort, then that's what you need to do. Okay, so one last thing, someone asked about the board in a board meeting. So as a CEO, we want to bolster the chair's role as the leader of the organization, right? We don't want to go, we talked about board structure and the nexus between those two people, right? We want the board chair to step up and to be the chair of the board. And so that we want to coach them, encourage them, make sure that they do that. So back to the earlier question about who sets the agenda, et cetera, for a board meeting, the board chair is in charge of the board meeting. So generally, the agenda is set by the chair in conjunction with the CEO, right? What are the priorities of the organization? It can involve the executive committee sometimes. Sometimes the executive committee can act as sort of a kitchen cabinet for the chair and the CEO. So sometimes they can get involved, but it should be a joint effort. I think the earlier question was, should the whole board set the agenda? I think that's unnecessarily cumbersome, frankly. And we can talk if you have a specific question around that, because there's always, new business at the end of every agenda, or there should be. So if one of your board members feels like something, they wanted to talk about something that's not on the agenda, there should be an opportunity for it to, for them to talk about it at the end of the board meeting under new business. Right. So, but you want the CEO's rules to support the chair, right? So ensure the board has what it needs to conduct business in advance of the meeting, so that there's not a lot of unnecessary reading of minutes, reading of reports that should have happened before the board meeting, that could have happened before the board meeting. Make sure that the chair runs the meetings, but as the CEO, be prepared to explain issues or answer questions if you're asked. And remember, because it is the board's meeting. I'm sorry, people are calling each other out in the chat. I don't think, Lisa, I don't think that's a question. I think it's, thank goodness we all get along on the board and communicate are supportive. Congratulations, that's awesome. Okay, and someone has asked for advice around, the founder, and I can help you with that. So frankly, just Googling founder is probably just as good. It's a syndrome that's widely recognized. And, that's it, right, which makes sense. I mean, the founder will say, well, I am the organization. Without me, it wouldn't exist, which is true, but you want it to exist without you in the future. So I threw in, you'll get the slides, some references for you to read about, just to inform yourselves, learn more, thought leadership, great insights, etc. Again, my website has some. I really like, you'll see I actually clicked on the effective board chair one at the top. It really is important, I think, to remember that when you're working between a board chair and a CEO, it's important to the higher functioning of the board, of the organization. You want to make sure that you're aligned around the strategic vision of the organization, that you all know where you're going, and that it's, you're not bogged down in day to day. You're wanting to lead to the future. You want to build the relationship, understanding what your various roles and responsibilities are, understanding that the CEO leads the staff and the board chair leads the board, but being flexible around how you determine that relationship between the two of you, and understanding that those roles and responsibilities are not meant to separate you into your different corners, that it's really about supporting each other and leading together in tandem for the good of the organization. So that is my slideshow. Are there questions? Did I just unshare? Sorry about that. And my PowerPoint just froze again. Questions, comments? Sue, is your hand up again?
Yes, it is.
Sorry.
I figure if there's a few minutes, I could ask a couple more questions. It's very clear, that I've been very clear with wanting to help this board be a better board, and they're very accepting of that. But I'm a little, I constantly run into, I don't want to feel like I know everything and you guys know nothing, because it's not like that. But what I do see besides, is that there's a number of board members who are totally not engaged. And the board president said to me, as the, whatever I am, some committee title, that it's my job to engage them. And I was like, I'm willing to do that, but I really think that's the board chair's responsibility as a, leadership functions. You have any thoughts on that? Governance. That's the word I couldn't think of. Governance.
While I'm answering your question, Sue, there's someone who has put in the chat that she wants me to return to the allegiance question around elected officials. It's confidential, so I don't want to call her out, but if that person would please put a little more information in the chat, because I don't really, I'm not quite clear on what you're asking. So it's we believe, we have Board Strong and Nikon too, believe that board members are collectively responsible to each other. So it's not any one person's job to engage board members. It's every board member's job to engage each other. And so how do you do that? Well, you have a collective idea of what it is you're supposed to be doing. It's good to have a written job description, good to have a retreat every once in a while, every other year, and establish those parameters, and then do regular assessments. So if people aren't engaged, if they're not showing up, then yeah, the board chair or someone, board chair, nominating chair, governance chair should just sit down with them and say, how are you doing? What do you think you're doing? Can you do more? So it's not necessary. I mean, it's not just one person's job to motivate the entire board. It's the board chair's job to figure out how do we set up the structures and the processes that will enable our board to engage with each other. But not, it's got to be a sort of peer-to-peer relationship and a collective responsibility and a collective effort.
Okay, and just to tag on that, and then I promise I'll stop asking questions, but the board have decided as COVID started, and I came on as COVID started, so it was really a bad time in terms of meeting the board members. We didn't even meet. And they decided to get better attendance at their board meetings. They'd meet less often. And it seems to me, as coming in from the outside and watching that, because they're meeting so infrequently, they're only meeting every other month, that people don't care about anything because they don't remember about anything, because, and that's part COVID, it's not just idiosyncratic, I don't think, to this board. And so I really want to say, look, you tried that, it didn't work, even I'm not interested and I'm really trying, do you have any suggestions about, I've been on plenty of boards that meet quarterly, that's more than enough, but it doesn't seem like a board that's active, the issues presented.
Do you have committees?
Really should be meeting that infrequently.
Yeah. Do you have committees?
We do have committees. The only one that are functioning is finance and fundraising. And governance, I do all on my own. No one wants to be on governance with me.
Okay, Sue, are you guys, what organization are you with?
Children's Home of Kingston.
Okay. Are you a member of Nikon by any chance?
We are.
Okay,
It took me a year to get them to agree to become a member again.
excellent. Shoot me an email. You get a half an hour of my undivided time for free. So I think we need to take this offline.
Great.
All right, so someone says, I meet with my board weekly on Zoom. I think that's more effective. Your entire board weekly on Zoom? That seems a lot. If you meet with your board chair every week, I think that's great. I think, the Zoom question is one that we will be answering over time. With COVID, with Zoom, attendance at our board meetings increased exponentially. It was great for our organizations. It's hard to build connections among board members on Zoom. So I think for every organization, you have to define, are we going back in person? How are we going back in person? Some organizations feel strongly that they need to meet in person. Others feel they don't need to meet in person, but they do need to do some stuff that keeps them connected. Maybe if they all live in the same place, they have a board dinner, they do a family day in the nice weather, something like that. We're balancing that Zoom made our board attendance and our board engagement go up, while our board knowledge of each and connection to each other's as individuals went down. And that's something we'll be learning about, I think, for a while. So the person who asked me about taxpayers versus board members, public library representing 3 communities, 15 board members, but some only want to lessen library tax. Oh gosh, libraries. And don't accept our mission and vision. Well, they shouldn't be on the board if they don't accept your mission and vision. And I don't know if you're stuck with them or not, but you can pull out New York state law and show them that as a board member, they are responsible to the wider vision of the mission and vision of the organization and are not entitled to act in their own self-interest. And if they want to reduce their own taxes, that's acting in their own self-interest. And again, my email is on the front of this deck when you get it. If you want to discuss further how we can do that, just shoot me an email and we'll figure, and we can talk more. So that's a little specific for this group. And gotcha. So someone asked me about the executive committee versus the board chair. I think that it depends on your organization. It depends on how big your board is. Your chair can, your executive committee can act as a kitchen cabinet, as it were. So if the CEO and the board chair feels like it's useful to bring in more people to, planning the agendas for thinking about things going forward, then that can be useful. That can be great. You want to avoid having the executive committee make decisions that should go to the entire board, right? The executive committee, by most bylaws, is empowered to make decisions in between board meetings in an emergency, and then report afterwards. But you don't want them to make too many decisions because it's your board all has fiduciary responsibility. Nobody on your board has more or less responsibility for governing the organization than the others. And if the executive committee is making all of the decisions and discussing all of the strategy, then your board members first aren't being given an opportunity to do their jobs. And secondly, they'll become disengaged because if you're not taking their opinions or their views into consideration, if you're just making decisions without them, then what's the point? So an example of something like that might be, I don't know, something happens, somebody's suing you, some staff member has been, there's a whistleblower that's come to the executive committee. Well, that is a place where you should start talking about it, but so that the executive committee can perhaps strategize on what do we think is the best to do, talk to outside experts, et cetera. But at the end of the day, they shouldn't be making the decisions. That should be, the board should know about these situations and make the decisions on behalf of the organization. How are we doing for time? All right, we have 6 minutes left. Thank you. All right, in our 6 minutes, make me feel good about myself. Put in the chat, is there anything you've learned or heard today that you're going to take away and try to apply or try to do something differently than what you're currently doing? No? Okay. Okay, someone is telling me that they meet weekly, and that's fine. If that works for your organization, then that works for your organization. If your board members have time to do it, that's great. I would just say that you want to make sure when you think about board meetings, and this is an entirely different topic, you want to think about having them make the strategy and decision and not just learning about what you do. Right, because the board has the responsibility to move the organization forward. And also, if your board meetings are just made up of reports from staff, they're boring and nobody will want to come to them. Oh, someone said the coach mindset is helpful, reinforce positive things. Thank you. So great. I think many people have been thinking along these lines. That's great. And you just need to. Oh, awesome. Sorry. Which is fantastic. All right. I'm so glad it's been helpful. Very glad it's been helpful. All right. So, oh, sorry. Called me awesome. Okay. So all right. So again, this will be online. The recording will be online. If you want to show it to your board chair or your executive director or anybody else, you will get the slides as well. And my email is on the front of the presentation. So please do feel free to reach out to me if you have any specific questions or anything that I can clarify or help you with. Because, y'all, our nonprofits are so, because we've learned, we work for nonprofits and we are in many ways the backbone and the heart and soul of our communities. And having a board that works for your organization, that really helps increase the amount of work and vision and strategy that you can do, rather than sitting back and just, showing up, will make your organizations more successful, which is what we want. So thank you. I think that's it. Thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate your participation and your attendance. And you will get notice of our next webinar, which is recruiting for diversity, and it's in July. I'm not entirely sure what the date is. It's the 4th Thursday as well. So I'll be doing that, and that should be fun too. Thank you, July 14th. Thank you, Megan. All right, everybody, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. If you have a long weekend for Juneteenth, enjoy that and the beautiful weather, and I hope to see you next month.